My life has been more difficult than I ever imagined, especially over the past year. As a nursing care worker in a suburban senior care facility, I've always prided myself on helping others through their hardships. But when it came to my own trauma, I found myself standing alone, with barely any support system to lean on. Finally, after months of rebuilding myself both mentally and emotionally, I had reached a somewhat stable place. But now, everything I've worked so hard to achieve seems to be crumbling around me once again. I, 27, have had a complicated relationship with my family since my biological mother passed away during childbirth. My father remarried when I was 3, bringing my stepsister Sarah into my life. We're the same age, born just hours apart in the same hospital. A coincidence that my stepmother never failed to remind me was meant to be. But from early on, it became painfully clear that Sarah was the golden child, while I was merely the obligation they had to deal with. The favoritism started subtly. When they bought us toys or clothes, Sarah always got first pick. Even with identical items, she would choose the colors and styles she wanted, leaving me with whatever remained. If I dared to protest, I'd receive lengthy lectures about being selfish and entitled. "The gifts are exactly the same, Emily," my stepmother would say, her voice dripping with barely concealed disdain. "You'll never succeed in life with such an ungrateful attitude." As we grew older, the preferential treatment became more obvious. Sarah began distancing herself from our shared friend group in middle school, gravitating towards the popular crowd instead. In a way, this was a relief. I could finally have our friends to myself without her constant overshadowing presence. Though our friends were initially shocked by her sudden change, they eventually accepted it, and my friendships grew stronger without her interference. The gap between us continued to widen throughout high school, until we had completely different social circles and interests. This arrangement worked better for me, as it meant fewer interactions with her. Even though she would still try to belittle me at school to impress her new friends, I had grown thick-skinned to her behavior. The nursing school incident. Things between us reached a breaking point during our senior year, leading to a rift that would never heal. While Sarah was busy planning her future at an expensive private university, I was meticulously preparing for nursing school. I had always been drawn to healthcare, inspired by the nurses who had cared for my terminally ill mother. The application process was rigorous, requiring not only excellent grades, but also strong recommendation letters from our teachers. I worked tirelessly on my personal statement and secured glowing recommendations, particularly proud of the letter from our biology teacher who had witnessed my dedication to healthcare-related projects. I hadn't paid much attention to Sarah's application process. It wasn't my business, and honestly, I was too focused on my own goals. But her confident smirk during those weeks should have warned me that something was wrong. To my horror, I discovered just in time that she had somehow accessed my application materials and altered my recommendation letters, replacing them with fabricated versions that painted me in a terrible light. The betrayal cut deep. This wasn't just sibling rivalry anymore. This was a deliberate attempt to destroy my future. I was done being the family doormat. Instead of confronting my parents, knowing they would dismiss my concerns as usual, I went directly to the school administration. I provided evidence of the original recommendations and explained the situation, including the years of systematic favoritism that had led to this point. The school took the matter seriously, launching an investigation that resulted in Sarah's application being rejected for ethical violations. When she received the rejection email, the look of hatred she gave me could have frozen hell itself. But she couldn't say anything to our parents. What would she tell them? That she got caught trying to sabotage her stepsister's future? The situation at home became unbearably tense, yet darkly amusing. We both knew what had transpired. But while I felt vindicated, she was trapped in a web of her own making. The aftermath. Unfortunately, my small victory came with consequences. When my parents discovered I had reported Sarah's actions to the school, their reaction was exactly what I had expected. Instead of acknowledging her wrongdoing, they turned their fury on me. "How could you do this to your sister?" my stepmother screamed, completely ignoring the fact that Sarah had tried to destroy my career prospects. My father, as usual, stood silently by, offering weak platitudes about family unity while doing nothing to address the real issues. They berated me for days, claiming I should have come to them first so they could find a solution. But I knew their solution would have been to let Sarah get away with it, while I was forced to be the bigger person yet again. The next few months were hell, but I focused on my nursing school applications to other programs, knowing that every day brought me closer to freedom. I had already decided that once I left for school, I would never return to that toxic environment. Meeting Daniel. During my second year at nursing school, everything changed when I met Daniel. He was visiting his grandmother, one of my regular patients, at the care facility where I worked part-time. Despite the somber setting of our first meeting, we connected instantly. Daniel was different from anyone I'd ever met, kind, understanding, and genuinely interested in my work. He was a senior manager at a growing IT firm, but he never made me feel less important because of my career choice. We started as friends, sharing the same social circle at the facility where many young professionals volunteered. Just before his graduation from his executive MBA program, he asked me to be his girlfriend. I said yes without hesitation. We had already grown so close, and I felt completely at ease with him. Later that night, he confessed he'd had feelings for me for months, but wanted to wait for the right moment. I found his hesitation endearingly sweet. Our relationship flourished naturally. The comfort and honesty we shared made everything feel right. I was transparent about my family situation from the start, explaining my minimal contact with my parents and complete estrangement from Sarah. I made it clear that nothing would ever make me reconnect with them, especially my stepsister. Daniel seemed shocked at first. His own family was picture perfect. He was the eldest of 4 siblings who all shared a close bond, and his parents were still deeply in love after decades of marriage. The stark contrast between our family backgrounds initially concerned me. I worried that someone from such a loving family couldn't possibly understand my situation. But Daniel assured me he respected my decisions and wouldn't pressure me to reconcile with my family just because he couldn't imagine being distant from his own. His apparent understanding made me trust him even more. The engagement. 2 years ago, when I was 25, Daniel proposed. We'd been dating for nearly 4 years, and I had no doubts he was the one I wanted to spend my life with. His family had welcomed me warmly from the start, making me feel like I finally belonged somewhere. I developed individual relationships with each of his siblings, 2 sisters and a brother, and felt more at home with them than I ever had with my own family. They included me in their traditions, their inside jokes, and their holiday celebrations. For the first time in my life, I experienced what true family love felt like. Marriage seemed like the natural next step, and I was genuinely happy with the life we'd built together. The year leading up to the wedding was intense, filled with planning and preparations. It was also challenging for our relationship as we discovered our differences and had to work through them. Still, we faced each obstacle together, determined to make things work. The wedding planning. One of our biggest conflicts arose during the guest list planning. I wanted a small, intimate ceremony, but Daniel had a large family he wanted to include: immediate family, aunts, uncles, cousins, and their partners. Meanwhile, I planned to invite only my closest friends from nursing school and the care facility. The thought of having my family at my wedding made my stomach churn. I hadn't even told them about my engagement. Initially, Daniel seemed to accept this, though I noticed his hesitation. When I asked if something was bothering him, he brushed it off. But a week later, he approached me with an unexpected demand. He insisted I needed to invite my family because a wedding wasn't complete without family present. I stared at him in disbelief, reminding him that I had always been clear about my family's absence in my life. They didn't even know we were engaged, and I preferred to keep it that way. Looking back, I should have recognized this as a major red flag. Despite claiming to understand my childhood trauma and family situation, which I had always been honest about, he was now pressuring me to compromise on something fundamental to my emotional well-being. But I was blinded by love and our years together. We argued intensely, nearly reaching a breaking point, but I knew we needed to find middle ground. After exhausting discussions, Daniel finally revealed his true concern. He worried that his extended family, who held traditional values about family ties, would judge me, and by extension him, for not having my parents at the wedding. His family had always lived by a family-first principle, and he feared my parents' absence would reflect poorly on both of us. At the time, I interpreted his reasoning as caring and thoughtful. Only later did I realize how problematic it was. He was more concerned about his extended family's opinions than his bride's emotional welfare. The impression he wanted to maintain mattered more than my psychological well-being, but I was too emotionally invested to see it clearly. The compromise. After lengthy negotiations, I reluctantly agreed to contact my parents, but I set strict boundaries. They could attend, but Sarah was absolutely forbidden. There would be no father-daughter dance, no family speeches, and minimal interaction during the ceremony. Daniel accepted these terms, seemingly understanding he had no choice. I also made him promise not to contact them himself. I would handle all communication, and only when I felt ready. Deep down, I hoped that by delaying the invitation, they might be unable to attend, allowing me to say I tried while still having my way. I suspect Daniel saw through this strategy, but he remained silent. The confrontation. I finally called my parents 6 weeks before the wedding. Their response was exactly what I'd feared. They immediately assumed the whole family would attend my special day. I cut them off mid-sentence, making it crystal clear that Sarah was not invited under any circumstances. If they tried to bring her anyway, I warned them I would personally escort them out. They protested, claiming this could be the perfect opportunity for family reconciliation, and that I needed to stop being childish. They insisted I'd already had my revenge through the nursing school incident and should be satisfied. I ended the call after stating these were my only terms. They knew the venue and time, and any attempt to change my conditions would result in immediate removal. The ambush. A week before the wedding, my parents arrived early and checked into a local hotel. They requested a meeting with Daniel and me, claiming they had something important to give us. Despite my reservations about stirring up old emotions so close to the wedding, Daniel encouraged me to go, promising we'd leave at the first sign of trouble. That reassurance made me feel slightly more secure, so I agreed. To my complete shock, though perhaps I should have expected it, Sarah was there. This was their gift, an attempted reconciliation. The moment I saw her, I felt physically ill, but somehow remained frozen in place. I looked to Daniel for support, but he simply sat down, ready to participate in their charade. They launched into what felt like a rehearsed speech about family healing, but I couldn't process their words. My mind had shut down, overwhelmed by the ambush and Daniel's apparent complicity. The breaking point. When I finally snapped back to reality, I stood up abruptly and grabbed Daniel's arm, telling him we were leaving. To my shock, he resisted. "We should sort this out," he said, as if years of manipulation and betrayal could be resolved in one hotel room meeting. I told him he was welcome to play happy families with them if he wanted, but I was done. I stormed out alone and checked into a different hotel, sending him a brief text about my location before turning off my phone. That night, I drained an entire bottle of wine, trying to numb the fresh betrayal. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and turned my phone back on, expecting at least a few concerned messages. Instead, there was nothing. Complete silence from Daniel, which felt wrong. He usually insisted on resolving conflicts immediately. I waited several more hours, but still no contact. That evening, I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. My fiancé had ghosted me a week before our wedding. The aftermath. Those 7 days were a blur of pain and confusion. Daniel remained completely unresponsive, ignoring not only me, but his family as well. No one knew where he was or what was happening. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. With a heavy heart, I contacted all the vendors and canceled the wedding. On what should have been my wedding day, I blocked his number and stayed with my closest friend from the care facility, trying to process what had happened. 2 months later, 2 months after the canceled wedding, I discovered the devastating truth. Daniel had married Sarah on what was supposed to be our wedding day. The news hit me like a physical blow. I felt like I was trapped in some twisted nightmare. My stepsister had married my fiancé after knowing him for barely a week. It made no logical sense, yet it had happened. Once again, Sarah had taken something precious from me, and once again, I was left alone to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. I forced myself to focus entirely on my work at the care facility, throwing myself into helping others as a way to avoid confronting my own pain. I was slowly rebuilding my life, finding my footing again, when yesterday I received an unexpected call from Nancy, Daniel's mother. Through her tears, she begged for one final meeting. I don't want to see her. I want nothing to do with that part of my life anymore. But I've never heard her sound so desperate, and part of me wonders if meeting her might provide some closure. Still, I'm terrified that reopening these wounds will destroy all the progress I've made. I feel completely lost about what to do. The truth revealed. After reading countless supportive messages from my friends at the care facility, I decided to meet with Nancy. The meeting proved both therapeutic and heartbreaking, as I finally learned what had transpired after I left that hotel room. The reality was even more twisted than I'd imagined. After my departure, my parents and Sarah had fed Daniel an elaborate story about my childhood, a completely fabricated version that painted me as the problematic one. The worst part wasn't just that they lied, but that Daniel, despite our years together, chose to believe them. He was so shaken by their stories that he didn't contact me for days. By then, I had already started canceling the wedding arrangements. When he received confirmation calls from the vendors, he panicked. In his confused state, he interpreted the cancellations as proof of my guilt, further convincing himself that my parents' stories must be true. Nancy revealed that Daniel had been an emotional wreck afterward, and in his distressed state, he'd foolishly turned to my parents for advice. They suggested an absurd solution. He could marry Sarah for the ceremony to avoid family embarrassment, then get the marriage annulled or divorced once the situation calmed down. The entire plan was ridiculous, but Daniel, apparently having lost all rational thought, agreed. Nancy explained that their whole family had strongly opposed this insane decision, insisting that canceling the wedding would be far better than marrying my stepsister. But Daniel, consumed by fear of public humiliation, went ahead with their plan. Since then, Sarah has refused to consider divorce, threatening to demand substantial alimony if he tries to end the marriage. The final revelation. The situation changed dramatically a few days ago when Sarah, in a drunken state, revealed everything to Daniel. She admitted to their manipulation and even confessed about the nursing school incident, proving that everything they had told him about me was a lie. According to Nancy, Daniel has been completely devastated since learning the truth. He's been unreachable, avoiding everyone's calls, finally breaking his silence only when Nancy managed to contact him 2 days ago. He's apparently desperate to explain himself and talk to me, hoping we can somehow work things out. I stared at Nancy in disbelief. There is absolutely no we between Daniel and me anymore, I told her firmly. He made his choice when he married my stepsister. Whatever circumstances led to their marriage, I'm not getting involved. Nancy broke down at my words, begging me to reconsider, but my decision was final. I've moved past that chapter of my life, and I have no intention of reopening it. Epilogue. These past few days have been emotionally draining, which is why I've taken some time before sharing this final update. Nothing dramatic happened. I chose not to meet with Daniel, prioritizing my mental health above all else. I told Nancy that while I sympathized with the situation, Daniel deserved the consequences of choosing to believe strangers over someone he'd known and loved for years. He had prioritized his reputation over our relationship, and now he had to live with that decision. I reminded her that a year ago, I was in an even worse position, alone, without parents to cry to or family to check on me. Daniel at least has that support system. He doesn't need or deserve my forgiveness. I blocked Nancy's number before she could try to guilt me further. Some might see this as cruel, but I can't help feeling this is karma at work. I had to rebuild my life alone, piece by piece, and it's only fair that he experiences the same. I have a feeling they might try to reach out again, but I won't respond. Whether Daniel stays in his marriage to Sarah or pursues a divorce is between them. I no longer have any emotional investment in either of their lives. This chapter is finally closed for me, and there's a certain peace in knowing that Daniel now understands exactly what he threw away. At least I can sleep better at night knowing he realizes what he lost simply because he couldn't handle being the subject of temporary gossip. Sometimes life's hardest lessons come from our own foolish choices. In the end, I'm back at my care facility, doing what I love most, helping others through their difficult times. It's ironic how healing others can heal yourself in the process. For the first time in a long while, I feel truly free.